Hi everyone, and happy holidays from the SV Lynx crew.
I'm Captain Blood, and this is my wife, the Admiral, Mary Ann. And we'd like to welcome you into our home on this holiday weekend to talk a bit more about boats.
But before we get started, we want to give everyone an update on our woes with the shipping container in South Africa.
Fortunately, we have some good news of sorts to report. We finally got a ship booked to bring our container. It will travel from South Africa to Shanghai, China, and then across the Pacific Ocean to Long Beach, where we will have it delivered to our build site in lovely San Dimas, California. This long journey will take the container on 2 ships and finally reach our port on April 4th, 2023. That's 2 months delayed from the original estimate, but that's life in shipping internationally.
We'll just have to make do. We'll spend the extra time working on what we can, like building the prototypes of the batteries we talked about in the last video. Here's a link to that if you want to watch.
Besides that, we can also do some preparation in building our positive pressure suit systems for sanding, our cyclone vacuum cart to handle all the dust without constantly clogging up our shop vacuum filter, and we can start preparing the build site, like pouring some cement pads, erecting a 50 feet long, 22 feet high shade tent over where SV Lynx will be built. We can add all of the security systems and automatic lighting, and add some better fences around the site for added security.
We also plan to take our tender out on some sea trials to see our range figures in both dinghy and tender configurations, and test out the Beastmaster wheels on a couple of beaches. Here's a link to the video about that.
We also plan to share some information and maps about our plans for sailing SV Lynx around the world. I know that may sound a bit premature, since we haven't even built our catamaran yet, but we like to plan ahead, and knowing what we will get to do on SV Lynx is like putting a carrot in front of a donkey. It'll keep us going and working hard to get to that reward.
As you can see, we have plenty to do and lots to share with all of you before the kit arrives on April 4th, when we'll get to unpack it and get to work.
Now, let's get on with this video.
Since it's Christmas weekend, we decided to do a holiday-themed show, so we're going to talk about Santa.
Have you ever wondered what Santa would do if his reindeers weren't available? What if Santa's reindeers were on strike, or they contracted the reindeer flu? Santa would still need a way to deliver all his packages. So, just to be safe, Santa probably needs to upgrade to a hybrid sleigh.
Let's suppose that Santa decided to go with a reindeer diesel hybrid and back up his reindeer with a good old diesel engine.
In that case, he would need to carry some diesel fuel, and for that, Santa's sleigh would need a fuel tank, or maybe 2, since, by all reports, Santa has a long way to travel on Christmas Eve.
So, which kind of fuel tanks would Santa want to add to his hybrid sleigh? Let's take a look at his options.
We've considered 4 materials for our fuel tanks on SV Lynx, and I think our logic works for sleighs as well. The 4 we considered for our boat were: number 1, stainless steel; number 2, aluminum; number 3, polyethylene; number 4, fiberglass.
Let's talk about the pros and cons of each, starting with the pros for a stainless steel tank. Number 1, a stainless steel tank is durable and long-lasting. Number 2, the strong metal would be extremely puncture resistant. Number 3, a tank made from stainless steel would be resistant to corrosion, though it wouldn't be immune.
Now, for the cons. Number 1, stainless steel would be much heavier than other options, and on a catamaran or flying sleigh, that makes a big difference. Number 2, even stainless steel will corrode in a saltwater environment, especially at the welds. Number 3, dissimilar metal contact will cause swift corrosion and must be avoided. Even a loose screw or washer that falls on one can be an issue.
Next up, let's consider the pros for aluminum diesel fuel tanks. Number 1, under ideal conditions, aluminum tanks are fairly long-lasting, 20 to 30 years. But life is seldom ideal and even less often on a boat traveling the oceans. Number 2, they can have baffles inside to cut down on fuel sloshing back and forth in rough sea states. Number 3, aluminum tanks can be made into any shape you want since they can be custom welded. Number 4, aluminum resists punctures and will tend to dent rather than getting holed. Now, Phil will tell you about the cons.
Hey, how come I have to be the negative person?
I'm the Admiral. That's the brakes.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go into the cons of the aluminum tanks. Number 1, moisture can be a big concern. After a tank is jostled and jarred by the nearly constant movement of a boat, gaps can form between the materials used to mount the tanks to the boat. Then water, from condensation or other means, can get into those gaps and start corroding the metal. Due to this, aluminum tanks generally don't last much beyond 10 years on an ocean boat before they start to get serious pitting and eventually pinholes. If you want examples of this, you can watch the Wynns troubles with their aluminum tanks or Sailing Blown Away's channel's issues with aluminum tanks. These are just a couple of examples of failing aluminum tanks on a catamaran, but there are plenty of other examples out there. Now, number 2, you must make sure your aluminum is of high enough quality to last, and it's hard to know if you're getting such a tank. Number 3, scratches to the tank can take off the oxide surface coating, and that will allow corrosion to get started. So you have to mount them somewhere where this will never happen. Number 4, the harsh ocean environment and constant pounding can and will put stress on the welds of an aluminum tank, possibly allowing fissures and fractures to form over time. Number 5, moisture in the fuel inside the tanks can cause corrosion, and zinc cannot protect the inside. Number 6, dissimilar metal contact will cause swift corrosion and must be avoided.
I'll let you do the pros for the next one.
All right, well, thanks. All right, so let's talk about the pros of polyethylene fuel tanks, sometimes called plastic tanks. This material is not susceptible to corrosion, and that's a big selling point. Number 2, they last a very long time, so you may only have to buy them once for the entire life of your boat. Number 3, they're more economical to purchase. Number 4, there will be no galvanic corrosion issues. Number 5, they are ethanol safe, assuming you want to put that kind of fuel inside, though we don't. Number 6, the seams are very strong when made correctly.
Now, for the cons of polyethylene tanks. Number 1, most, if not all, do not feature baffles inside the tank. Number 2, polyethylene material is porous to gases, allowing vapors to escape over time, eventually making your boat stink of diesel fuel. Number 3, they come in limited shapes since most of these types of tanks are made in a mold and custom shapes could be very expensive. Finally, let's talk about epoxy fiberglass diesel fuel tanks, starting with the pros. Number 1, fiberglass tanks last 30 to 40 years, so they're likely to outlast your boat. Number 2, they can have baffles made on the inside of the tanks. Number 3, they'll not corrode even if water is present. Number 4, they're fairly light. Number 5, they can be custom made in any shape.
And now for the cons of fiberglass tanks. Number 1, if you plan to use ethanol, you must make sure you use a resin made for that. But diesel doesn't use ethanol, so we're good to go. Number 2, fiberglass could be punctured if hit with a strong, sharp object, so they should be put in a location where that won't happen.
Since Santa's sleigh must fly, we've decided that heavy stainless steel tanks are out, and that is the same argument against their use on our Performance Cat.
Right. And of the other 3 choices, aluminum tanks last the shortest time and could get pinholes from corrosion, so we decided to rule those out as well.
That left polyethylene or epoxy fiberglass tanks. We don't like the idea of fuel smells leaking through the polyethylene, and having no baffles is a problem, as that sloshing of the fuel can take a toll on tank mounts and even seams of the tank, not to mention noise.
That leaves fiberglass. It won't corrode while Santa's over salt water. It's very strong to handle all those presents he has to carry. They're fairly light for Santa to keep up his speed. The tanks will be incredibly long-lasting, and Santa's sleigh goes out every year. The fuel won't slosh around, upsetting the delicate balance of his sleigh, and fiberglass keeps the vapors inside the tank from bothering Santa's red nose. So, epoxy fiberglass tanks are the choice for his sleigh. For similar reasons, we think fiberglass tanks would work best for our Performance Cruising Catamaran, though we don't have red noses.
Now that we know, like Santa, that we want fiberglass tanks for SV Lynx, we had to figure out how to have them built. There are two options. Number one, build them ourselves. Number two, have them professionally built.
And building them ourselves was our first plan. That would make them cheaper. But how much can we really save? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. The main issue we ran into was not cost. It was getting insurance on our boat. These days, getting insurance for our boat is getting harder and harder to obtain, and the cost keeps going up.
It turns out that many insurance companies don't like the idea of insuring a boat with a do-it-yourself fuel tank on board. The thing is, they hate fires because then they must pay out on an entire boat claim. So many of them require professionally made fuel tanks.
However, having them built professionally means they will have that higher cost we mentioned. However, in looking into pre-made fiberglass fuel tanks, we found that we could get some with baffles for about $300 each. That doesn't break our bank account, and we can tell the insurance companies that SV Lynx has professionally made fuel tanks.
Now that we know we're purchasing professionally made epoxy fiberglass fuel tanks with baffles, the next question was, where do we want them located on SV Lynx?
Well, the tanks don't weigh much, but the diesel fuel we put inside weighs 7 pounds per gallon, or 0.832 kilograms per liter. That means if our tanks are full, we're adding something like 700 pounds. That's a lot of weight, and in a perfect world, we would like to keep that weight low down and out of the bow or stern of the catamaran to cut down on hobby horsing. Unfortunately, we don't have room down in the hulls in the center of the boat, since we need that area for plumbing and water storage, which is also heavy. And though we have some room in the bows and stern, we don't want to add weight in those locations. However, SV Lynx has 3 storage lockers just forward of the mast. They're not quite centered bow to stern, but are close. However, they aren't very low down, being just above the bottom of the bridge deck. That location will just have to work, since we feel it's more important to keep the weight out of the bow and stern than lower down.
The 2 outer lockers, where we would put the fuel tanks, measure 43.62 inches long, 35.2 inches wide, and 32.53 inches deep.
Those are plenty large enough for the 279 or 299 liter tanks that Schoening recommended for the original Solitaire 1490. However, we are building the 1520, which is a hybrid diesel electric cat. That means we won't need quite as much diesel fuel on board. I won't go into all the reasons for this fuel reduction in this video, since we have a video coming out dedicated to the hybrid system we are using on board SV Lynx. But the end result is that we reduced our vessel's capacity for diesel fuel from 158 gallons to 100 gallons.
That means we only need to fit 2 50-gallon tanks, one in each locker. Each of those large lockers has a capacity of 216 gallons, so we only need to use up about a quarter of the locker space for each tank.
We had to decide if we wanted the tanks horizontally located in the bottom of the compartment or vertically up against one side. We're leaning towards the bottom for 2 reasons. Number 1, that lowers the height of the fuel weight as much as possible. And number 2, we can put a false floor on top of the tanks, allowing us to stack gear into the compartment without the danger of anything damaging the fuel tanks. In the rare times when we'll need to service the tanks, we empty the locker and remove the false floor, then we can easily access the inspection ports in the tanks from above for cleaning, etc.
Speaking of inspection ports, we're planning on adding more than one per tank. That way we can easily clean out each of the baffled areas inside the tanks when the time comes.
Now, we come to the final design element, and perhaps some of you with knowledge could help us decide. The question is, where should we put the ports to fill the 2 tanks? There are a couple of options. We could run them out to the edge of the boat to make the fuel port easier to reach from standing on the dock. For that, we must run them through the forward cabin along the roof. We would run these lines along the top of the bulkhead panel to keep them out of view, and could even house them inside a small soffit, if we so desire.
Alternatively, we could put the ports on the deck just inside of the side walkways. This makes for shorter runs to the tank, with the fuel lines going almost straight down to the tanks, and that way we don't have to run horizontal lines through the forward cabins.
Another option is to run both ports to both tanks, thereby allowing us to fill both tanks at the same time from either side of the boat. And that could be done from either inside or outside fuel ports. We could also add shutoff valves in case we don't want to fill both tanks at the same time.
So that's what we're thinking about for the fuel tanks for SV Lynx. If anyone has any thoughts on what the best fuel filling layout options might be for these choices, now's the time to speak up since we haven't decided yet and would enjoy some insights from people who may have owned cats.
Now, back to Santa. In truth, I suppose having a diesel engine and tanks on a sleigh really isn't a good idea. In fact, we tried to get rid of them off SV Lynx as well. Unfortunately, magic was out since Santa Claus isn't on our crew, though he is invited. And though some people still try to tell you that an electric-only propulsion boat is fine for cruising, that's a bit of magic as well. Battery energy density still isn't good enough, by a long shot, to replace diesel fuel. Not on a catamaran that needs to stay light.
But having said that, with a Performance Cat, you can cut down your diesel usage to a minimum if you also have an electric system. But like we said, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of a hybrid and all the reasons that it works in an upcoming video just after the new year.
For now, we just want to wish everyone a happy holiday, no matter which one you observe, for whatever reason you choose to celebrate. For us, Christmas is just a time to remember friends and family and celebrate those connections with gifts, good cheer, and maybe a fattening meal. And so we raise a toast with some holiday eggnog to all YouTube friends, whoever and wherever you are in the world. We hope to visit as many of you as possible once SV Lynx is built and we head out around the world. Maybe we can meet up for a holiday meal someday. Cheers.
Cheers. If you're a part of our Patron crew, you have given us a wonderful holiday gift already, and with your kindness, you're helping make our voyage around the world possible.
And for those of you who just like to watch, you're also doing your part, as every little bit helps. We hope that we're being informative, honest, and friendly, and welcome any suggestions that you might happen to make about our videos.
Our gift to all of you is our gratitude for your time in following our channel, and we wish all of you the best of times, good health, great friends, and wonderful food.
So, this is Captain Blood.
And Admiral Marianne saying,
Happy holidays!
And now we'd like to answer a few questions or comments from last week's video and thank our patrons.
We'll get right to that. All right. Well, at this point, it's time for us to take a couple of questions about last week's video. So we'll start with a suggestion made by B. Wicks, who said, watch the brand of 200 amp circuit breaker. The cheap Chinese ones are garbage. They will have a significant voltage drop, overheat, and insufficient contact area for the terminals. They said, make sure to use really good foam for the constant impact and vibration environment. Well, thanks for the suggestions. We have already researched which circuit breaker to use and decided to go with a more expensive Eaton Bussmann 200 amp breaker, based on some good reviews we read. As for impact and vibration to the batteries, we do plan to mount batteries on shock absorbers and foam. Now, I had designed that into the inside of the first batteries, the big 48 volt ones I did. But when those batteries turned out to be too heavy and I went to the smaller 24 volt models, I didn't have room inside the case anymore for the shock absorbers. However, we can add them outside the case and it will be just as effective. All right, well, Chris Moki asked, why not Master Volt? Well, I should have mentioned in the video that I looked into virtually every brand of battery. I only went over a couple of them in the video because those were just examples. However, there are plenty of others, and they all share some of the same issues for us. In the case of Mastervolt, it's price, just like Relion. They're very expensive, and though the batteries are great, we just can't afford to put them on SV Lynx. Now, if Mastervolt or Relion wants to sponsor us, just give me a call, and I will gladly put either of their quality batteries on SV Lynx. But at the regular retail price, we just don't have the budget for those brands. I'd like to own an HH55 catamaran as well, but can't afford that either. On the same subject, Mal mentioned that he would go with MG Energy System batteries. They have the same issue, coming in somewhere around $35,000 for at least what we need for our boat. Then, on the same issue, Bill noted that he's going with Signature Solar 48-volt 100-amp server rack batteries for his boat. Likely, those will be fine for Bill. We considered rack mount batteries due to their low price and weight, both important things to our boat. However, for us, we decided against them for a few reasons. The first is that they are not designed for a marine salt air environment, so that was an issue. The second is that we don't have room for a rack mount system on SV Lynx. Space is at a premium. Thirdly, our tender is an electric propulsion boat, and we need to store batteries on that tender, and so they need to be easily removable when we want to convert Traveler into a dinghy. That just won't fly with server mount batteries. So, for now, we've yet to find a single commercial battery that has everything we need at a good price, low weight, compact size, and made for the marine environment. They have to be in a portable form factor and with all the features we included in our design. So, for now, we're going with the new ThermoWorks battery based off of our original design and prototypes. You'll get to see the prototype versions of these batteries go through some of these tests soon as we take Traveler out for her sea trials. So there we go, a couple of questions answered, and now we'll just say goodbye and thank our patrons.
We'd just like to thank our patrons for your support.
We just really couldn't do this without your help. So we so much appreciate everyone who donates to our cause. And we have our loyal patron crew right over here. So again, thank you all.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and click on the bell icon.
We really appreciate it, and it does help our channel a lot, and it doesn't cost you anything, but very nice of you to do so for us. All right, thank you.
Thank you.